On today's episode of Locked On Mariners, we're grading the entire Mariners starting rotation. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Friday, October 20th, 2023. This is Trident Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. On the show today, we're handing out season grades to the Mariners' 5 main starting pitchers in 2023. And we're going to start, of course, with Luis Castillo, who, statistically speaking, had one of the arguably 5-6 best seasons of any starting pitcher in the American League. 3.34 ERA, 3.81 FIP. That's the same as his xFIP. He was worth 3.4 FWAR, 10.01 Ks per nine, 256 walks per nine, over 197 innings pitched, 33 starts. He finished the year with a 14-9 record. Colby, what did you think of Castillo in his first full season as a Mariner?
He was pretty good. The numbers, speak for themselves, but this is why we often warn against box score scouting. Castillo wasn't quite as good as he was last year with Seattle. Certainly we saw very little of playoff Luis this year, and in particular, when you needed him most, he didn't show up for the last 2 starts of the year. So I think when you kind of factor in the inconsistencies that Luis had this year, you factor in his failure in those last 2 starts. I don't think I can go any higher than a B. Like I said, overall, he was still very good, and he took the ball every 5 days. He avoided injury, which has been an issue in the past with him. He gave you 5 or more innings in every start except for his last one, the most important one, but whatever. So, yeah, overall, it's still a good year. The numbers are good. He probably is going to get Cy Young votes. Like, he was good, and for a large chunk of the season, he was your best pitcher. Maybe not your most consistent, but certainly your best. So, it's tough to be that hard on a guy who's probably going to finish in the top 5 or 6 of the Cy Young vote, who posted as often as he did, who put up the numbers that he did. But I think when you look at consistency, and when you look at what he did in those big must-win starts, he kind of fell flat. He fell flat, and he wasn't consistent enough throughout the year. He had months where he was great, and then he'd have a month where he was terrible, and then just kind of painfully mediocre for a month, and you're just kind of waiting for some level of consistency, and it just never really showed up. So overall, good year for Castillo. You're still glad you made that trade. It makes you better. And Castillo is still a big part of this thing going forward for the next 4 or 5 years. But the letdown at the end has to weigh pretty heavy here. And when you're the de facto ace of your staff and you fall flat in those big moments, you have to be graded on a curve here. So if Miller or Woo or Kirby or whoever did this, it'd probably be an A. But Castillo has to be that guy. He has to be the guy who kind of carries the weight of those playoffs style starts, and we know he can do it. Obviously, his start in Toronto was incredible, and his start against the Astros in the following series was pretty darn good. So it's just one of those things where we know he can do it. He just failed this time around, and there's some reasons for that in terms of his consistency and where he struggled this year. But yeah, overall, just factoring all that in, I think it's probably a B.
Yeah, I'll go B plus because again, the numbers are great. He's going to, as you said, probably going to finish, top 5, top 6 in American League Cy Young voting. Like that's a really, really good year, no matter how you slice it. But I also think this is a very good example of pitcher numbers, pitcher statistics, not necessarily lining up with the eye test. Because I watched all 33 of Castillo's starts this year, and specifically those last 12 to 14-ish starts of the year for him. weren't great. I mean, I'm sure some of you remember us saying like he's really playing with fire here, and it feels like he's going to get got if he doesn't figure it out. And that's mostly because he had a very inconsistent slider and a very inconsistent changeup. The fastballs were great. Four seamer, the two seamer were great pretty much all year long. Fantastic pitches, some of the best pitches in all of baseball this year. But the slider had some real command issues, not really control issues, but command issues. Like he was fine in the strike zone, but he was oftentimes catching too much plate with that slider, and opponents were punishing him for that. And that's one of the reasons that he posted the highest hard hit rate of his entire career and the highest barrel percentage of his entire career this year. He also wasn't able to keep the ball on the ground, which is not typical for him. He's usually been around that 46 to 56% ground ball rate. He was at 38.9% this year. That's the first time he's ever fallen below 40% in his entire career. So just a really strange year for Luis. And, over those last 12 to 14 starts, I mean, even on the nights that he was getting away with it and he was only giving up, 1 to 2 runs, he was still walking, 3 to 4 guys. And he was playing with fire a lot of the time over basically the course of the second half of his season. You think about that start in Tampa where he went 7 scoreless, but he walked 4. Like he was walking the tightrope there. And then, as we've said in the past with guys like Logan Gilbert, before this season, and Bryce Miller this year, like you can have a great fastball and get away with it on some nights, but if you don't have quality and consistent secondaries, once you run into really good lineups, you're probably going to get got. And that's what happened to Castillo against the Astros and the Rangers in those final 2 starts. So really strange year for Castillo. And again, it wasn't really a control issue because simultaneously, along with the career highs in hard hit rate and barrel percentage, he posted a career low in walk rate, which is really good. Right. So even though that, I mentioned all those walks that he had and all those struggles that he had over the last 12 to 14 starts of his season, he still was able to post that career low in walk rate. So it's a very similar conversation to the one that we had about Julio yesterday, right? Where it's like the overall numbers look great, but there's a lot of context here that has to be combed through. And so again, when I look at Castillo's year and who he has to be in this rotation, the guy that he has to be, after watching all 33 of these starts, ignoring what the numbers say and just going off of what I saw with my eyes, it wasn't good enough, especially in that second half. So I'll still give him a B+, like I said, because the numbers are so good, because he's going to finish, high in the Cy Young voting. But there's a lot that he needs to improve upon, but still very good season for Luis Castillo. So we're going to be talking about George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, and the rest in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Jace Medical. Modern medical care and treatment are important, but our global supply chains are fragile. Things like pandemics, natural disasters, and foreign travel may cut you off from the treatment you need. Jace Medical is your solution for that. Just fill out our online form and one of our board-certified physicians will review it to determine whether medications are safe and appropriate. Then they will send your prescriptions to one of our partner pharmacies where your Jace order will be filled and mailed directly to your home. Everyone should feel empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jace Medical offers the Jace Case. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical plus an additional $20 off by using the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout on jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. So before we get back into our starting pitcher grades, once again, a reminder that we are running a giveaway, or more specifically, Colby is running a giveaway. He's giving away some of his cards. Colby, do you have the cards there still to show on the screen?
Yep. Sure
So
do.
what are you offering up?
So first up, we have this Matt Brash autograph card.
Ooh.
And then we have, is it Miller next or is it Woo?
It is Miller next.
Miller time.
Miller time.
Nobody's ever made that joke.
Good
before.
one.
Bryce Miller autograph card right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Bryan Woo right
Woo.
there.
No one's ever said that before.
Yeah. I guess the grand prize is this Harry Ford autograph card too. So
Sir Harry.
You know, couple Rookie of the Year candidates, Reliever of the Year candidate, and Sir Harry.
There you go.
Pretty good haul, if you ask me.
That's a good collection. So all you have to do to enter this giveaway is subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening on a podcast platform, go over to youtube.com, type in Locked On Mariners, subscribe to the channel, and then leave a comment on any of our videos posted between this past Tuesday and October 30th, and you are automatically entered into the giveaway. Now, in order for us to give away these cards, we need to hit some subscriber goals, and I'm going to make an executive decision here. We're actually going to lower the sub goal that we initially set. Initially, we had it set to 9,750 subscribers for us to give away the Matt Brash card. We're now going to lower that to 9,500. And then at 9,750, we're going to be giving away the Bryce Miller card. At 10,000, we're going to be giving away the Bryan Woo card. And at 10,250, we'll be giving away the Harry Ford card. So subscribe. Tell a friend to come over, subscribe. Tell your worst enemy to come over, subscribe, and leave a comment on any of our episodes posted between this past Tuesday and October 30th. And we will announce the winners on Halloween, which is going to be a very fun episode. We're planning on doing our season awards / superlatives episode that day, and maybe we'll be dressed up and getting spooky on Halloween. Full terms and conditions for the giveaway are in the description of this episode. So all right, let's get back to our starting pitching grades here. Colby, let's go to George Kirby here. Let's talk about George, who had his first full season in Seattle. 3.35 ERA, not too far off from Luis Castillo. 3.34 FIP, 3.63 xFIP. He was worth 4.4 F4, 8.12 Ks per 9, just a 0.90 walks per 9. That's the lowest walk rate in all of Major League Baseball amongst all qualified starting pitchers, and that was over 190 and 2/3 innings pitched, 31 starts. He went 13-10 on the year. Colby, what did you think about George's first full season in Seattle?
Really good. Ran into some controversy in the middle of the year that was, self-inflicted. But no need to rehash that. He was very good. Now, again, there was a long stretch where he was not very good, and that did skew the numbers. After that incredible start against Baltimore, where he went 9 scoreless innings, he struggled. The next few times out, the next 4 or 5 times out, he really struggled, and he put up some stinkers against some really mediocre teams. So that does have to weigh in here. But aside from that one stretch, he was pretty darn good the entire season. And he threw my favorite pitch of the entire year, a knuckleball to Corey Seager, a filthy knuckleball, I might add. I think it had an RPM of 145. So that is definitely Wakefield like. The fastball velocity maintained. He didn't seem like a guy who was tiring. I don't think that the struggles he had in September were about fatigue. He was able to push through, and he made a pretty sizable jump up to 190 innings, and he didn't lose any command or control off of that. The numbers are pretty darn good. Like, he's a legit Cy Young candidate going into next year, and maybe he gets some down ballot votes this year as well. But no, he's right there with Castillo in contention to be the Mariners, quote unquote ace. It was a good step forward for him. Still some things to work on. There's always going to be, but he's only in his second. He'll be entering his second full season this next spring. So plenty of time. He's going to throw strikes. The fastball, the 4-seam and the 2-seam both have value. We started to see kind of more of a cutter being added instead of a traditional slider. So it looks like, it's 4-seam, 2-seam, cutter, curveball, split, and maybe a knuckleball. Who knows? So, and we did see the split actually help out too. So Kirby's a guy who's going to continue to tinker. He's going to get better. But as for what he did this year, I do have to, weigh those starts in September a little bit here. But I think overall this is B+, A- territory. He was really good in 2023, and yet we still think there's more there, because there is, and that's a really exciting sign.
All right, don't straddle the fence. B+ or A-? What is it?
A-.
Yeah, I'm gonna go A- as well. Yeah, very good.
I would say
for
this
George
about Kirby. I think he's the second most untouchable player in the Mariners' entire organization.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
I think
Because
honestly, I think the margin's pretty big.
I think Kirby is whether it be in 2024 or 2025 going to take a very large step into becoming one of the true elite pitchers in Major League Baseball. I mean, he has what it takes. He has the elite command now. He doesn't necessarily have overwhelming stuff, and that was a little bit of an issue for him this year, especially when teams got very aggressive against him. I'm very interested to see how he tries and counters that in 2024, but the sky is really the limit for George. So yeah, great season for George. Loved pretty much everything that we saw. I mean, yeah, there was some inconsistencies here and there, but we also got to see the guy that we saw in game 3 of the ALDS at times as well. When you look at that game against Baltimore, which why couldn't you have just scored a couple runs that night?
Because it was Felix. It was Felix night.
Yeah,
That's why.
Yeah,
the script was
all
too
right.
perfect.
So right. So let's talk about Logan Gilbert now. 3.73 ERA, 3.76 xFIP, 3.85 FIP. He was worth 3.2 F4, 8.92 Ks per 9, 170 walks per 9. Over just like Kirby, 190 and 2/3 innings pitched. That's 32 starts, 13-7 record for Gilbert. What did you think about his year?
Might have been the most consistent Mariner, just throughout the year, but consistently not quite as good as Castillo and Kirby. So you kind of have to weigh, how valuable is consistency versus performance. Gilbert was still very good. And once again, we're talking about a guy who it's not hard to see how he can take yet another step forward next year and really kind of jump up into that 4-win range that Kirby and Castillo are in. So overall, Logan, he improved his off-speed stuff. The splitter is a legitimate weapon that he's going to continue to refine. That's going to get better. We saw more of a consistency with the slider, and even threw the curveball a little bit more. Just dropped it in, stole a couple strikes, and obviously the fastball is going to be Logan's bread and butter for the foreseeable future. So yeah, I think when you just kind of look at it, he was very consistent. He was very solid all year. Had a couple dominant outings. Of course, the complete game shutout on the 4th of July against the Giants really stands out. But yeah, Logan had another really good year. Didn't quite take as big of a leap as I was hoping, but still, it's definitely a step forward. Obviously, new career high in innings pitched and all that stuff. Walks went down. He incorporated a new pitch, and it just fits seamlessly with his, repertoire. So I think that I think Gilbert probably gets a B plus. Maybe a B. Like it seems weird to grade him higher than Luis Castillo because Castillo did have better numbers, but there is some consistency with Gilbert that you didn't really get with Luis. So yeah, I think B plus, somewhere like 86% if we were grading on a math test. So yeah, I mean, if you want Castillo higher than him, I guess that's fine. But like, I think at the end of the year, I'd rather have Gilbert on the mound than Castillo, and that does weigh into my grades a little bit.
I was actually going to give him an A because contextually speaking, I think it's very different than grading Castillo because Gilbert's still young and still kind of finding his feet. And
you think
this
he's
year
better
I felt
than Kirby, huh?
Well, I think it's how should I put this? I take away more positives from Gilbert's year than Kirby just because I feel like this year was the proof of concept for Gilbert that he can become a complete pitcher, right? We talked all offseason about the splitter. We heard about it all offseason about the splitter, and we were like, yeah, whatever. Guys come up with new pitches all the time. Let's actually see it in action. And then we saw it, and like right out of the gate, it was an absolute weapon for him. And like you mentioned, his secondaries became legit offerings for him. So while there's still a couple more steps forward that I'd like to see him take, I think this was a very successful year for Logan Gilbert. And I'm really excited to see how he builds on top of this. All right, so up next, the two young guys, Bryce Miller and Bryan Woo, who, of course, we're giving away their cards. If you guys subscribe, that is, you guys have to do your part in order for us to give away those cards. We're going to talk about those guys, hand out some grades to them in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Sleeper. We're getting close to crowning a new MLB champion, which means the clock is ticking on your chance to 100 times your cash on daily fantasy baseball. Pick more or less on stats for your favorite players like home runs, hits, strikeouts, and more for up to a 100 times payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right and you could win big. If things didn't go well in your home league this year, no worries. You can still salvage the fantasy baseball season over at Sleeper. There you can pick the players you want and call your shot. And when you use promo code Locked On, that's LOCKDON, you'll get up to $100 matched on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen as we grade the Mariners starting rotation in 2023. And as we come to a close here, we're going to look at Bryce Miller's rookie year. 4.32 ERA for Miller, 3.98 FIP, 4.31 xFIP. He was worth 1.9 FWAR, 8.15 Ks per nine, 1.78 walks per nine, over 131 and a third innings pitched, over 25 starts, finished with a record of 8-7. Colby, what did you think about Miller this year?
Really promising rookie year. Obviously, the ERA is not amazing, but the FIP is pretty good, and it all kind of looks like a number 4 starter, which for a rookie is pretty good. That you just step in and you're just a number 4 starter, and like Gilbert, like Kirby, there's still more there. Miller basically did most of this with just a fastball, so pretty impressive. Again, very similar to what Logan Gilbert did his rookie year. So obviously, yes, he has to get the slider figured out, or some off-speed pitch figured out. He has to find value in something other than the fastball. But overall, for a 24-year-old rookie for most of the year, he was a number 4 starter, a legitimate number 4 starter. In pretty much any rotation. Like, that's a really good year for a rookie, and set a career high in innings pitched. Didn't really need to be, babied, or babied's not the right word. Didn't need to be like protected with his innings cap all that much. We saw it a few times. They take him out at 75 pitches after 5 or whatever. And yeah, there were a few blow up starts in there, but again, this is a rookie pitcher, 24 years old, basically doing it with one pitch. So I think when you kind of look at context here, and you kind of look at his season in totality, it's hard not to be excited about Miller, and you can see why he's going to be a very popular trade target for a lot of other teams this winter. There's a lot to like here. He threw strikes, sub 2 base on ball per 9. That's huge. And we saw glimpses of a good slider, and Miller's a guy that, we know there's more in there. He's always tinkering. He's got 3 different sliders. Like, maybe he adds a cutter, or maybe it's he adds a fork ball or something. Who knows what he might do. So Miller, there's a lot to be excited about here. As for his 2023 season, I think you got to give it like an A-, because he, considering expectations, considering how he kind of came up to the big leagues before the Mariners, I'm sure, wanted him to. He kind of got forced into that spot a little bit, and he came through, and he posted every 5 days, and he was pretty darn good. Yes, again, there were some blow up starts. There were blow up starts with every Mariner starter, but that doesn't really weigh down as much when you're a 24-year-old rookie as it does when you are a 30-year-old highly paid number 1 starter. So Miller, I think, to me, gets A-, and there's a lot of exciting stuff happening here, and we'll see if he's in the organization 4 months from now. But if he is, he's certainly earned a spot in that rotation, and he's probably pretty set. As I don't think he's the guy who's losing his rotation spot if the Mariners did go out and add like Sonny Gray or Blake Snell. I think he's safe unless they trade him.
Right. I'll match you on the grade. I'll go A- as well, especially, given the circumstances, right? Given what the situation called for, the circumstances of the Mariners rotation with the injuries that occurred and all that. And Miller kept them afloat on the back end of the rotation, and then some. Like, he was fantastic at times. I mean, his first 3 starts were incredible. And then he had some really good starts, like the one down in Houston, right? Like, there were some really, really big time moments from Bryce Miller this season. And again, that's pretty much with just the fastball working. I mean, at times he flashed some quality secondaries, but he really, really needs to tinker with those and get those things right. Because He's like we talked about with Castillo. You're not going to survive with just a fastball. I mean, you might get away with it on some nights, but you really need to flesh out your repertoire in order to sustain success as a major league starter. So and keep opponents off balance, right? So that's going to be the big key for him in 2024, especially if he sticks in Seattle, and we're going to be talking about that quite a bit over the course of the offseason, I'm sure, with Miller if he stays in Seattle. But overall, I think you have to be thrilled with what you receive from him, given everything that happened this year with the injuries and all that. So lastly, Bryan Woo here for our starting pitcher grades. 4.21 ERA, so close to being nice, so close to doing the memes there. 4.36 FIP, 4.26 xFIP. He was worth 1 F4 flat, 9.55 Ks per 9, 3.18 walks per 9, 87.2 innings pitched, 18 starts with a record of 4-5. Woo's career, unlike Bryce Miller, did not get off to a particularly good start. Marco Gonzalez wound up on the IL, which wound up being a season-ending thing for Marco, and Woo was just kind of thrust into making his major league debut against, well, the best offense in all of baseball this year in the Texas Rangers, and he got shellacked. But from that point forward, he was pretty good. I mean, he had a couple of blowups here and there. He had a couple of starts where he was just really playing with fire, and it looked like he got pretty gassed there towards the end. I mean, of course, he's only a couple of years removed from Tommy John surgery. This was essentially his first full season pitching at the professional level as well. So what did you think about Woo's rookie season?
Yeah, you consider everything when you try and come up with a grade here, and you look at Woo. Woo's, interestingly enough, has thrown about 189 innings in professional baseball, and like 87 of them have come in the big leagues. So that shows you how fast he moved. This is a guy who didn't pitch a ton in college either. When the Mariners drafted him, he was coming off of Tommy John. Then last year, he kind of makes his full season debut, and he jumps through 3 levels, and he goes 57 innings. And now this year, he jumps drastically up to 131 innings. Like, that's a huge jump, especially for a guy who didn't really have a normal buildup in college. So I think when you look at like, hey, he wore it down the stretch, I think that's pretty easy to understand why, and it's hard to hold that against him. It's not really anything he did; it's just the limitations of his body as he hasn't built up yet. So, the strikeout numbers are nice. The walks, they're not bad at what was it, 3.2? That's not bad.
Yeah.
It's a little higher than you would like. And when you look at the rest of the Mariners rotation, it really stands out as, wow, that guy has walk issues. But I think overall, we did see some really good stuff with the 2-seamer towards the end of the year. That really started to be an out pitch that he could use against lefties. Still really needs to figure that out. Needs a changeup, needs a slider. There's lots to work on here, but it's a really smooth delivery. It's a fastball that sits 94 to 95, but it plays up because of how smooth the delivery is. It just, there's a lot to like here with Bryan Woo. And again, it's not hard to see why Bryan Woo is a guy who a lot of teams are going to call about this winter. So overall, I think Woo, considering circumstance and considering that he kind of got rushed to the big leagues well before the Mariners would have wanted him to be here, which caused him to, throw more innings more consistently than I'm sure the Mariners were planning on. When you consider all that, I think you have to give Woo pretty much the same grade you give Miller, maybe a little bit less because the numbers weren't quite as good. So B+, A-. Like,
Yeah,
it was
I'll
a really
go
good
B+.
year.
Yeah, I'm gonna go B+ on him. But yeah, I mean, we saw flashes of a really good pitcher here. We saw flashes from the 2-seamer, like you mentioned, and the cutter looked pretty good at times, especially against the A's and the second to last start of his season, I believe. I think the Mariners should be very excited about what they potentially have here once he starts to get ramped up more. And I'm very excited about him in 2024 if they don't trade him. So I'll go B+ because again, numbers weren't fantastic, but again, given the context of everything, I don't really see how you could go any lower than that. Yeah, that's going to do it for our show. Now we're going to try something new here for the listeners that stick until the end. We're going to ask you guys a question of the day now towards the end of the episode to see how many of you guys are actually paying attention. So let us know the answer to the question of the day down in the comments. Colby, what is the question of the day?
I might have forgotten it. I believe is a burrito
Yes.
a sandwich or is it a ravioli?
That is correct. Yes. That
What
is
is
the
it
question
more
of the day.
of?
Let us know in the comments below. We want to see how many of you are paying attention. All right.
How many
That's
of you
good.
listen to the end?
That's right. That's right. This is science. This is research. That's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Trident Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dan Gonzalez, that's DANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day and a beautiful baseball weekend, and we'll see you next time. Peace.